Can you see me, ho? Can you hear me, ho? Ready to go, ho? In another room, ho? Yeah, I'm going to be doing the videos in this room, I think, from now on. They're kind of a bit better in terms of lighting, so it means you might actually be able to see me better in these. Whether that's a good thing is up to you. But yes, so I'm here to do some more hip hop CD rankings. So hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey. Rank CDs every day. I've decided to go for this next one and go bigger. The final boss of hip hop production, Dr. Dre. So this should on paper be easy because there's only 3 to choose from, but they are very strong CDs. I think I've got them in the order I would like to go for, so let's get to it. So I'm starting at number 3, Tail End Compton, a soundtrack by Dr. Dre, released 2015, and sort of conjunction with the NWA Straight Outta Compton film that came out at the time. So it wasn't a soundtrack to the film as such, but a couple of songs did feature in the film, and it did kind of feature as a cinematic soundtrack to Dr. Dre's career in a sense at that point, and possibly in total. I mean, who knows if we'll do another album again. It took 16 years to get this one. With all the Detox debacle, and yeah, so it kind of establishes a lot of what made Dr. Dre what Dr. Dre is. There's a lot of live instruments on the album which help make the songs feel more grandiose, but they're scaled back when they need to be in parts. So from the opening Compton documentary sample, just throughout the album just goes through things that have happened throughout Dr. Dre and his careers, or looking at tracks like It's All On Me, looking at how Dr. Dre first broke into the industry and how NWA became popular, and then moved on to Death Row and this kind of thing. All in a Day's Work, talking about how hard he had to work and keep on working in the music business, in the industry, and lots of guests throughout Dre's career, just like a sort of callback to everything that's happened to him throughout the 30 years up that point. Ice Cube appears, Snoop Dogg appears, Exhibit appears, lots of people from the past appear, people from the sort of current roster he was working with, Kendrick Lamar, Anderson .Paak, John Connor, whatever happened to him, and some surprise guests as well. Jill Scott appears, DJ Premier appears for a nice little collaboration between the two of them. There's not a lot that stands out in a sense, just because everything kind of works so well together. The tracks do some at points bleed into each other well. There's lots of nice transitions between the songs, but again, it's just kind of like a celebration of Dre's career and all the people he's worked with. So in terms of content, that's a lot of what appears in it. There's some nice social political content particularly with the Premier collaboration, Animals, Satisfaction with Martian Brothers and Snoop Dogg, which talks about how people want to try and put on a persona and don't really work out for it. There's some dark tracks in the middle with Loose Cannons, Issues, Deep Water, which features a drowning Anderson .Paak. All this kind of builds until the penultimate track, where we get the Eminem appearance, which is on Medicine Man, which is literally just a crescendo of a verse of Eminem doing the, how people didn't really think he would last, and thought he wouldn't fit in at first, but then he became Dre's arguably greatest find. And it's just the verse just builds and builds over 40 bars, like rapid fire. There's even a machine gun at a point to kind of emphasize this even more. But then after that appearance, final track, Talking to My Diary, brings it back down again, or just like a little mellow outro track. Sees the instrumental ride out for quite a bit at the end, which is something that Dre does on tracks on his other projects, which we'll get into a little bit. So I think just in terms of, because it was fresh, and it was great to see that Dre was putting out an album at that time, that he could still put out quality material, he really still had an ear for music, and bring out the best in people. All the guests on here bring some of their best, particularly a lot of the older characters such as Snoop, Ice Cube, Exhibit, bring out the best verses they've done in quite some time. But again, there's not a lot that kind of, everything is so good on it, but not necessarily as great as some of the heights that got hit on other projects, which is why this kind of has to come third place. But it was difficult. This album could actually very well age better. Well, in fact, I think it has kind of aged a lot better already than a lot of the stuff on the other material, other albums. Just in terms of the reflective nature of the project, just really helps it along in terms of content as well. So number 2, 1992's The Chronic, so Dr. Dre's debut album, the album released on Death Row, and it started Death Row up, and pioneering the sort of G-Funk sound from the West Coast at that time, and it certainly is funky in a lot of parts, with the funk samples, lots of smooth West Coast sounds on there, very dark sounds as well. This came in the aftermath of the LA riots, so there's samples from the riots on the album, which adds to the paranoia and uncertainty of Black America at that time, which thankfully all got sorted out, and there's never been any problems since. There's certainly the big highlights from the smooth Let Me Ride, the collaboration with Snoop, the back and forth Nothing But a G thing, the amusing Dre Day, taking things into a more soft and kind of social political aspect with Little Ghetto Boy, a big highlight on there. The rest of the content does kind of get a bit difficult to listen through from time to time. You do kind of have to take a lot of it with a pinch of salt, of just it's establishing the darkness of the time, and the anger and frustration that was affecting the streets of Los Angeles at that time. But there's there's a lot of violence on the album, there's a lot of sex on the albums to mix things up. There's sexual violence on the album as well, but again, it's the production that really helps bolster the project. The guest verses don't do a lot more that Dre doesn't already do himself. Snoop, Corrupt, RBX, Lady Rain, they can't do a lot more for the project. They do bring some good verses on there, particularly towards the end half of the project, where it kind of focuses more on them rather than on Dre, to kind of establish Death Row a little bit more. But it's the production that holds this album up, really. From, the funk samples, let's say the Led Zeppelin drums on Lyrical Gangbang. The skits are amusing, but can age a bit. The the Roach outro, again, the talking about the letting the instrumentals ride out. This is a big example of that. It was just pretty much 5 minutes of a G-funk instrumental, but it's definitely fun in places. It hits very hard in places. There are tracks which don't really can be skipped over quite easily. You wouldn't miss that much. But I mean, I think it does still hold up well. It was iconic for its time. It helped usher in a new sound. So mainly for that reason, it has to go number 2. So for number 1, 2001, which was released in 1999, of course. And again, every Dr. Dre album kind of fits in with the style of production of his time. Late 1999, this kind of went more into less of the G-funk sound and more of the live instruments that he began using later in his career. And so, again, as such, a lot of it does feel very grandiose and bold. It's kind of the halfway point, in a sense, between The Chronic and Compton. Great guests on there. The guest list has expanded exponentially on this project, again to show how many people he was working with at the time. Of course, this is the Dr. Dre introducing Eminem to everybody, helping establish Exhibit. Hitman, who appears several times on the album and didn't really do much afterwards. Snoop is still on there, Corrupt. There's, again, a lot of content on here which just doesn't work that well at all. I mean, say what you want about, whether it's morally acceptable to have Eminem and Dr. Dre having a conversation on a track about killing Eminem's wife. There are still tracks on the album which seem almost entirely dedicated to sexual violence. Rappers just seem to have I don't know why they felt the need to brag about slapping women at this time, but yeah. So towards the end, you get a lot more of that very blatant sexual violence, which you can skip over very easily. But the highlights on the album, again, really, really bolstered the project. So the Eminem assisted Forgot About Dre, What's the Difference, The Watcher, and when we get right to the end with one of probably Dr. Dre's most vulnerable track, The Message, about the death of his younger brother, you see just how much of a range Dr. Dre can have on a project like this, even though a lot of it is drugs, sex, violence, skits, which sex, drugs and violence, a lot of it. There's amusing appearances from Eddie Griffin, but a lot of it still kind of, it doesn't really divert from the overriding theme, for lack of a better word, of just sex, drugs and violence. But again, the production, just the drums, the keyboards, the guitars and bass on just everything really, really hits so hard that it just brings the tracks up so much that it overrides a lot of what is being said on the project. Even though Still Dre, a lot of there are songs on there that do deal with Dr. Dre's return to prominence after a few failures, and whether how people view him now that he's no longer in the streets and is successful. So there is content on here which overrides some of the more questionable stuff on there. And at the time, it was just a huge project. There was a lot of stuff on it that I just loved when it first came out, and it was one of the albums that really helped get me into hip hop and hip hop production. So for a lot of that reasoning, it just has to be number one. I mean, for Dre verses as well. Eminem was writing for him at this point. Jay-Z wrote some stuff. Royce wrote some stuff. So the Dre verses are definitely, you can tell, the best Dre verses on the album, and they're better than some of the ones which would come later and the ones which happened earlier, which again help the album along a lot. But yeah, so that's why I think 2001 has to be the best Dr. Dre project, but it's by a hair, or a chronic leaf ash, perhaps, an ash ahead of the other two albums. They're very, very close to each other, and on certain days, I think they could be in a complete separate order. Compton will probably end up being the album which ages the best out of the three of them, but in terms of production, 2001 just has to hit the highest on the ranking. So yeah, I will see you again for another one real soon.